climate change doesn't live on an island. We're all impacted by it.
It's really not and shouldn't be a political issue.
Climate One has ensured that indeed many, many different parties have seats at the table.
Every mainstream religion has a mandate to care for creation. We all have a moral responsibility to the future. The way parents have a responsibility for their children.
We all have children or relatives who are very young. Do we not want their world to be good too? Do we not see clearly that what we are doing is not sustainable? And if you do see that, and you continue to deny it for some political reasons, then this is a travesty.
Kids are growing up now, and there's absolutely no question on whether climate change is real, whether climate change is happening, and the question now instead is, what should we do about it?
The future of environmental activism is motivating young people to become civically engaged.
Now more than ever, we need to come together as a culture and a society to address this really important issue.
I am a supreme optimist. I do believe that we can transform ourselves. I do believe that we have the energy, ability, and courage somewhere inside of all of us to do what has to be done.
Thanks for joining us for this live stream discussion with renowned artist and activist Shepard Fairey on the power of art. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area and would like to acknowledge the Ohlone and Miwok people who inhabited these lands for 10,000 years. We'd love to hear from you today, so please share your questions in the comments section of the live stream, or you can tweet them at us using our handle @ClimateOne. We're recording today's conversation for the Climate One radio show and podcast. It drops every Friday. If you missed an episode or want to hear more Climate One conversations, subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. This program is generously underwritten by the Sidney E. Frank Foundation. Shepard Fairey is best known for his Barack Obama Hope poster during the 2008 presidential election. His work is now included in the collections of the Smithsonian, the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, the Modern Museum of Art in New York, and many others. Well, Shepard Fairey, welcome to the Climate One podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. I'm really excited about this conversation. You have said that growing up, you were drawn to a lot of rebellious activities. What did punk rock teach you about climate art? What did punk rock what did punk rock teach you about art?
Well, growing up in Charleston, South Carolina, which is a very beautiful place, but not a progressive place, I was only exposed for a long time to art that was decorative or was reinforcing a lot of the cliches of the region. My dad told me when I was a kid, if you're really successful, you might one day paint the duck stamp. And that didn't connect to me that much then. It actually probably connects to me more now because my understanding of ecosystems, the duck's place in things, is more meaningful to me now. But punk rock and skateboarding showed me a culture that was about ignoring what the mainstream was doing, using creativity to build your own scene, and and it made it cool to have an honest and unvarnished voice. And what I realized was all these tools of empowerment, because punk rock was not supported by the dominant framework, like making stencils and homemade t-shirts and stickers and flyers for promotion, that this was all incredibly empowering. And so, that coupled with the messages from a lot of the bands I liked in punk rock, whether it was the Clash or the Dead Kennedys, Black Flag, all of that. Plus I did get into Bob Marley also, who had a lot of great political messages. This made me think about how creativity is not just to make artwork that's to match the couch, but how you can do something culturally with it. And that evolved for me over time. But I was hungry for the something that was different than the dominant culture of South Carolina, and I found it in punk rock.
So a purpose more than just pleasure or pleasing to the eye. When you were in college, you saw an art piece depicting the globe with a mask around it. How did that shape your environmental awareness?
Well, it made me think about the power of symbols and how the globe, even though the world seems vast, it's actually not that big, and that everything we put into the air, we put into the water affects I guess I was considering the Gaia concept before I even knew that word, but that this is a planet that breathes, and it needs to be able to breathe clean air. So I really liked the way that each person could see themselves in the planet itself with that image. And I think that the more, even before the internet, I realized that we're all confronted with so much white noise, that images that convey a message powerfully, iconically, using symbols that are relatable, that was an important tool of communication. And I saw artists far too narrow and cryptic often, and elitist. So I was always looking for examples that sort of bridged high art and that punk rock ethos that had been so important to me as a developing teenager.
And we should mention, for people who may not be familiar, the Gaia concept is this idea that the earth is a living organism that's pulsing, and that everything's working together as though it was an organism. You have an Earth Day artwork by Robert Rauschenberg. What does that piece portray, and what does it mean to you?
Well, Robert Rauschenberg was one of my favorite artists from the time I really learned about contemporary art and pop art. And not everything he did was political, but he was the artist chosen to make the very first Earth Day poster. And when I did something for the Rauschenberg Foundation a few years ago, a gift was one of those posters. And it's it's the bald eagle, the national bird, which is also an endangered species, or at least was. I'm not sure whether it's still endangered, but is protected. In the middle of a scene of a lot of debris and trash, and I think if anyone feels at all patriotic, that this idea that the symbol that we use to to be proud of America is threatened by our behaviors, that there's this contradiction, I thought was a really powerful piece, without being too slogan oriented or didactic. And so that was another window into ways that you could make people reconsider their behavior when something that they think is valuable in terms of what they associate with their own identity is under threat. And I thought it was a smart solution.
You recently completed a mural in the Arts District of downtown Los Angeles called "Drink Crude Oil." Describe that mural and what you were provoking with it.
Well, it's a piece that has kind of a collage aesthetic, and I look at advertising as this insidious force of shaping people's behavior. And within that piece, there's a Coca-Cola bottle, but instead of it saying Coca-Cola in the same type style, it says crude oil. So it says "drink crude oil," and then there's an oil derrick and a flame and a guy who looks like a soldier, but it's a gas station attendant with a gas nozzle, and it says "we never stop charging." And it's making the correlation between the way that the economic forces and the of the fossil fuel industries and the accumulated power of that industry means that they can keep reinforcing their message through advertising and lobbying, is something that it's difficult for the average citizen to overcome, and it's even difficult for governments to overcome. But within this piece, there's a woman, you could say an activist for environmental justice, who's wearing a hat with a flower with a globe in the middle of the flower, who is in some ways, like, in this, she's metaphorically up against, and in this piece is literally up against all of this propaganda to maintain the structure of the economic and functional structure of how the fossil fuels industries works now. And it's something that I think people, when they realize that they're pawns in someone else's plan, they go, wait a second, I don't know if I really want that. And it's one of the reasons I use obey in my work. I'm not encouraging people to obey. I'm actually encouraging them to question obedience by taking what's in the ether, which is all these different unseen forces to make you fall in line with someone else's agenda, and crystallizing that into the direct command to obey, so that people go, obey what? Do I really want to?
Right. And so much of your work focuses on that concentration of power, and fossil fuels are, highly concentrated industry, and a lot of power. How do you think about that? That's speaking for the climate emergency. We're up against that huge concentrated power with a lot of fragmented power.
Yeah, well, that's where it's actually going to take community organizing, voting, people choosing how to spend their money. That is, in a way, a very strong message, and vote. Capitalism does respond to supply and demand. So if you demand renewables, or you demand electric cars, they will respond. But it requires in a way a combination of all these things to reach a critical mass that changes the structure of this of the fossil fuels industry, and how we think about energy consumption. So I'm promoting all of those things with different art pieces I'm making, but in some of them, I'm encouraging people to vote. In others, I'm saying, look at this beautiful, sacred environment that we all value and we don't want to go away. And in other pieces, I might be saying, think about your children's future. It's I'm basically using every strategy I can, but it's important that people understand the severity of the issue, but it's also important that they don't feel paralyzed because it's too overwhelming. So I'm always trying to see how I can get the balance right in my communications, with both the text and the imagery I'm using.
Right, to convey urgency, but not alarm people so much that they shut down, or that they get numb to that. You can't be on high alert all the time, right? I mean, adrenaline doesn't work that way.
Right, and the feeling of hopelessness is very demotivating. So keeping people motivated is important.
And you have said that you embrace what you call an inside-out strategy, working with the establishment. You've described kind of the outside. Describe what you mean from the inside.
Well, for years I couldn't survive just as an artist, so I did a lot of marketing and design projects with corporations. And whenever possible, if the corporation that was approaching me liked my work and liked a lot of the ideas in my work, then I would encourage them to, be courageous about putting those messages out. So in a way, using their very powerful machinery to put across the messages about, equality, about environmental responsibility, about democracy that I think are important. And And then oftentimes, even though there's a fear in the corporate world that something will, diminish their that support with certain consumers, actually taking a stand frequently bolsters loyalty and support. So even if that might not pan out that way, if for a moment I can get them to do the right thing, that's what I'm going to be trying to encourage from, my position of very little power, but I use what I can.
Subversive on the inside. So much of environmental messaging can be kind of righteous and preachy. When you were creating art related to environment, how do you approach that kind of not being kind of holier than thou?
Well, it's a tough thing, and sometimes I try to use humor. I mean, I think the even the drink crude oil piece has a little bit of dark humor, dark sticky humor. But there's another piece that I did based on a photograph I shot looking from Williamsburg into Manhattan, and there's some factories there, and it was a really beautiful sunset. But I made an illustration where the pollution from the factory is creating the smoke is going into this gold and orange and black sunset, and then there's a couple standing there on the on the waterfront looking across at the sunset, and the caption is these sunsets are to die for.
Oh.
And I think that when I have a little bit of humor in there, but that's also pointed that's a way to not just be the sort of Debbie Downer, and have a cool factor, have a style to what's there. I'm taking a lot of different approaches, but the rarely is it a just save the whales. I do want the whales to be saved, but I'm trying to find things that draw people in before they just instantly reject something as too hippy dippy or asking them to have to consider their imperfection in any of their behaviors. It's more seducing people with something that maybe will get them to reflect upon it and make their own choice rather than feeling like they're being judged.
Right, and you've done a lot of environmental imagery, et cetera, but nothing has really broken through like the Hope poster, or even the poster that you did for, I think it was the Women's March, was, we the people. So talk about that, those images, and why hasn't your environmental imagery broken through like those have?
Well, one, I think that, for example, with the Obama, the much of the world was paying attention to Obama, and had a range of feelings. But when I created an image that was a good symbol for him as a human being, rather than just it being like his logo, which is a great logo for his campaign, there was an immediately transmittable icon for him, and so it benefited from that. However, the We the People series was based on archetypes. It was saying that this Muslim woman, or this Latinx woman, or this Black boy were all equally American, equally human, equally patriotic, and I think for a lot of people who feel like they are not well represented within, what it means to be American, or any of those other things, that it as well as people who want to see more inclusion, those archetypes made sense, but they were all about humanity. From Obama to that, they were about humanity. And the environment is a much more abstract idea. Yes, it's the, we all live within this. It should definitely arouse some sense of what's at stake for humanity in us, but I think it's less immediate. And I think it's the way we find human form for almost anything that we think is inspiring or sacred. And whether it's calling an impressive ship a she, or a god a he, all of these things end up having human projection upon them. So with some of the images I've done, that idea of the human connection to the environment and things being sacred have been important to me. I did the Protect the Sacred image, which was about respecting Native American tradition as well as respecting the environment based on that idea. And I know that within certain circles that image did really connect, but nothing.
I have it in my home. So
but nothing is broken through in the same way as, like you said, as those other images. And hey, if there's anybody that thinks they have the winning formula, I'm open to suggestions, because I desperately want people to care about these issues. And I've tried a wide range of approaches with my art. And I feel like every action makes a difference, but this is an issue that we really have to break through on. And some things that are going to compromise life on this planet might already be too late to fix, but we're an innovative people. So we have to encourage people to care and to take action. And that's, that's from the most brilliant scientific minds to somebody that just changes a minor aspect of their habits around energy consumption. But we're probably all going to have to do something.
Right. I think if you ask a lot of people on the street, quick, without thinking, what do you think of climate change? They would think of polar bear, maybe a smokestack, a human face. It's not easy to come up with a human face, even a villain, right? World War II, you come up with Hitler. There's villains that you can quickly come up with other issues. And with climate, it's hard to come up with a, human face for either a hero or a villain. And that's, I think, been, environment is seen as outside of us, over there, separate somehow. We're not part of it.
Well, very true. But several of the pieces I've made have used, a protagonist within them, because I know that portraiture is alluring for people. So whether it was the drink crude oil or several other images, there's one I did called Raise the Level, that is, my wife is in it. Another one called Fan the Flames, with a woman with a fan with a globe on fire within the fan. And it's not encouraging people to fan the flames. It's saying, we continue to fan the flames, unfortunately, that, for all the things that we're doing, there's a lot we're not doing. And I don't want to discourage people, because I think there's stuff that's happening that's encouraging, but we need to do more. And so all of these things are hopefully ways for people to see how every individual's actions make a difference, and how there is a very human connection to this issue. It's not just about polar bears or leopards that are endangered, and all of those things, I think, affect people emotionally and might actually be the prime driver for some people. But I think it requires a lot broader of a sort of swath portfolio of approaches in order to touch everyone. And yeah.
And do you think that includes fine art? Because you clearly come from the more street art, skateboard, countercultural place. Do you think fine art has a place in that? Places art that is presented in clean spaces with white walls to elite audiences?
Absolutely. A lot of the pieces that I'm making as poster art that might be given to the NRDC or 350.org or Greenpeace are also canvases that I make, and then use proceeds from those canvases to go back to those same organizations. And sometimes I go with something as subtle as a wave that has oily water in the foreground, and the name of the piece is Dark Wave, or a wave with an oil derrick off in the background, and the name of the piece is This New Wave is a Little Slick for My Taste. I like, a little bit of humor. That's like punk wasn't slick, new wave was a little slick. I have another one called Water's the New Black. So I'm but the wave is quite seductive and hypnotic, and everyone, even if they say, oh, I hate cliches, they see a beautiful wave and they go, all right, except for that cliche, I like that one.
Yeah, right. You gotta catch people and gotta be a little surprised.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine to swim upstream some, and then to also utilize the power of the water going downstream some too.
The climate conversation is often driven by facts and charts, and although I think it does have human dramatic elements to it, how do you think about the relationship between art and facts and how people are able to receive them?
Well, I wish people were driven more by facts, and I claim to be, but I know I'm very emotionally driven, just like everyone else. We feel things, and then we look for an intellectual justification for those feelings. And that's why we can be led astray so easily by nefarious forces. Now, when someone with what I think is an altruistic intent can make something that's emotionally resonant, that leads somebody to then care about facts that maybe that same person is presenting, that's a beautiful thing. That's what I'm striving for often. And but I know that I have to lure people in with something that connects emotionally. And so if I make a piece that is for example, this t-shirt is an eye crying with the globe in the bottom, and it just says Earth Crisis. And I might make this, and then somebody reads the text about a myriad of ways that we need to adjust our behavior and push back against corporate influence. They might actually care because everyone can relate to, I hope, crying as something that means, you're overwhelmed by something emotionally. And the planet is overwhelmed by a lot of the, depletion of resources, environmental destruction, the amount of carbon we're putting into the air. I feel like it's a reasonable metaphor.
Yeah. Mother Earth is definitely crying. And you got to start obviously with Obey the Giant and sort of cropping up in public spaces, and have done a lot of your work in those public spaces. And climate is a tragedy of common public space. We are pumping pollution into the global commons, the air and the water. Individuals at every scale, personal, corporate, national, are act in ways that are rational for themselves and damaging to the public, to the commons. So I'm curious how you think about that parallel between public space, as an artistic expression, and public space that's being polluted by our activities.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something I've considered a lot. And I always felt as a street artist that the public space is really meant to be for the community. And anybody that participates in democracy can appreciate the idea that we all should be able to shape what our world looks like, or at least what our communities look like. And yet corporate advertising and government signage were pretty much the only visual communications in public space. And I always thought there should be more art. And I initially said, well, I'm going to do that with or without permission. And now I get invited to do things. But one of the things a lot of people don't consider about these commons, and it's something I learned about from my friend Adam Wereback, who is the youngest president of the Sierra Club, is that, that idea of common assets, air and water, that we all need to be healthy, yet certain companies really benefit financially from polluting or destroying and these common assets. And so the way people should think about that is that these are owned by all of us, yet they're compromised by predominantly by a very powerful few. And yes, we all can decide what kind of car we want to drive, and those few often say, yeah, it's your carbon footprint, it's because you drive an SUV. But really, we need to be thinking not only about how we're contributing to the maintenance of these common assets or the health of these common assets, but also how we need to vote to make sure that the people who wreck the environment also pay to restore it. And that was the concept of cap and trade, which was initially put forward by Republicans, and now they have no idea what anyone's talking about. That wasn't our idea. We don't like that idea. Which, if anyone doesn't know what cap and trade is, it's the idea that the businesses that pollute pay to undo their pollution. And a lot of people don't even think that cap and trade is enough. They think that the behaviors that are destroying the environment should be illegal and regulated against. And I actually agree with that. But I think at the very least, those common assets that, we will all be suffering when those common assets suffer, you should not be compromised on the average person's watch and on their dime. It should be something that the people who disproportionately cause the destruction of those assets have to pay to restore. And I think a lot of people don't think about that, and so I think they would agree if they understood that concept. But it's not easy to get people to to consider all of that. It's not a super exciting issue, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not a way we think in a very individualistic, atomistic kind of way of thinking about individuals. And I'm proud that I work at the Commonwealth Club of California, and I've seen a lot of presentations over the years I've been working here. One of the most resonant was Ralph Nader, who said, never separate the common from the wealth. Like, he was commenting on the work of the parent organization, which is, the common and the wealth belong together in one word, and how, some of our greatest national treasures are held in common, national parks, et cetera. Of course, we have to consider how the national parks were created and the indigenous people that were pushed off of them. But the point remains in terms of so much of our wealth is held in common. And so thanks for that reflection. We have a question from, we're doing this as a live stream, and we have one listener, watcher, Mark asks, it seems like most of your compelling, iconic images are the combination of two elements, a human protagonist with a concept. Do you think that that's the case? A human protagonist and a concept.
Yeah, I do think that's frequently the case. I've found that people respond to a lot of my portraiture, and sometimes even I can't help but when I'm illustrating, stylizing and idealizing, and some people have said that I make the villains look too good in my illustrations. I'm not intending to. But this is a natural process that I think, it makes an image that people feel like they have some connection to. And when I look at mediums that have power, film has such amazing power, because when there's a strong story and great acting, everyone can see themselves in the protagonist. And there's no way to have one art piece have the same dimension as a film, but I understand the power of that connection to a protagonist. So I'm then adding in a concept that I hope that people will, even if they don't understand the concept just from the portrait or just from the initial symbols, that once they're digesting it, it becomes clear, and the emotion that they feel based on the aesthetics, whether it's the portraiture or the combination of it all, will maybe either amplify their existing love for the environment and the belief in taking care of the earth, or it will shift their opinion so that they will. But it's not only, I use this technique for a lot of different causes that I work on, not just the environment, but one of the things I've said semi-jokingly is like, hey, in the battle arena for all these different ideologies, like you can't joust if there's no stadium left. Like hey, even if you want to be a contrarian and say, oh, I believe in individualism, is like, yeah, well, we're all be gone, including you, the individual. You can't build a seawall high enough or a oxygen chamber with enough supplies and food to,
right.
If the planet's uninhabitable. And hey, everyone that wants to be a winner wants to be validated by an audience. So even if you do win, your audience is gone. That's really hollow, right?
Who are you going to sell to? Yeah.
Right. You got 0 likes because there's nobody left.
Oh, that one hurts. Yeah. Shepard Fairey is a renowned artist and activist, perhaps best known for his 2008 Hope portrait of Barack Obama. Well, talking about the protagonists and emotional connections, I want to talk about you. You were born in Charleston, South Carolina, where seas are rising at an accelerating rate. Now, an inch every 2 years. Floods are increasing, sometimes making the hospital inaccessible. Your dad's a doctor. Your family still lives in Charleston. How do you feel about your home being threatened?
Well, I feel the same way about it as I feel about Bangladesh being threatened and about New Orleans being threatened. I feel less bad about Southern Florida because they're voting in the ways that I feel bad for even people that vote against their own interests. So I'll retract that joke. But luckily my parents have always cared about the environment, and they're sort of moderate. They don't like to rock the boat, but they believe in truth. They believe in protecting the environment for future generations. And Charleston is an extraordinary place. I think a lot of people who live there and even people who would visit there would like to not see it submerged. But the collective will has to be there to you can't just build the battery in Charleston higher, which there's one of the things they're talking about. My parents lived right there where the waves crash over during hurricanes. I've been through several of them myself, where it's terrifying, and hurricanes have happened, but they're intensifying. And if you live through it, the feeling of powerlessness is really traumatic. And I think that we need to be considering that a lot of these things are intensifying, and that not only is it going to be bad for our parents, it's going to be bad for displacing populations all over the planet. So if you if you're soft on immigration, great, be welcoming. And if you're not soft on immigration, maybe you should consider climate as something that you take seriously.
Right, because bring a lot of people north. I don't
know if I want the Floridians migrating to California or anything. I'm kidding, but
Already people are moving out of Florida. Some are going to Michigan and to places that are.
Yeah, I mean, this is serious stuff. And I just see the need for immediate but incremental change to be something that people need to consider how much less of a difficulty that is, and how adaptable we can be now. If we keep moving now and we move more quickly now, then then when potentially there's a critical mass for some things that are unstoppable, and if they are to be stopped, require a brutal compromise in things that that we now define as our way of life.
How concerned are you personally about climate disruption? Do you lose sleep over it? Do you think it'll affect you directly, personally? Or is it already?
Well, I mean, it's affecting some of my decisions about what car I drive, how far away from my house is my studio. But these are things that I'm just looking at as how to be responsible. I just was reading an article yesterday about how Joshua trees are disappearing from Joshua Tree because it's the desert, and many of those plants are incredibly resilient and adaptive, but they can only take so much. And this is heartbreaking. I went to the Galapagos a few years ago and realized that it's a special place because of how species adapted to a harsh environment. It's not a tropical environment. It's near the equator, but it's actually a very hostile environment, which required more extreme adaptation, which is why Darwin could see the differences in the species. And but that happened over thousands, hundreds at least of years. And the timeline we're on, we can't adapt that fast. And also seeing how the introduction of a new bird or goats or different insects from ships into the Galapagos could decimate certain species there instantly. A lot of people don't understand how fragile everything is that we're living in, that we take for granted. It's fragile. And so this is how it's affecting me psychologically, that I'm realizing that we as a species are not we're not as thoughtful as we should be, and that the fragility of things is something a lot of people aren't considering. So I'm quite worried. I'm worried more for my kids than I'm worried for myself. I mean, I've lived a good life. If my plane went down tomorrow, I'd still be like, I won the lottery. But I'm compassionate. I care about other people. I care about the future for other people.
Speaking of fragility, you read the book White Fragility and have been working to understand your own privilege. You're reading John Lewis's autobiography, I think now. What have been some recent revelations for you about your own power as a white man, and what are you doing to be a good ally to people of color?
Well, I've been making work since I grew up in Charleston, where they started the Civil War, and it's very racially divided economically. I've been aware of racism almost my whole life, and yet I learned a lot in the last little over a year, I guess, a little over a year, right? George Floyd was killed a little over a year ago. Because I'm a white straight male, I had a lot of blind spots.
Me too. Yeah.
And so, working with a lot of racial justice organizations, collaborating with artists of color, trying to make sure that I'm not, whether it's Native Americans or any other people of color, that I'm supporting rather than taking the microphone or the spotlight. This is all stuff that I'm thinking about in a more, I think, a more precise, sophisticated way now. And because I do believe that equality is anything short of equality on every front is uncivilized. I care about all of this, and even when it makes me have to admit that there were things I took for granted or things that make me uncomfortable about how to forsake privilege, that I need to do it, because otherwise I'm not practicing what I preach, and that's important to me. And there's a lot of emotions, and sometimes I feel my feelings are hurt by people misinterpreting some of my statements or some of my efforts as me trying to be a white savior. I just want to be a good ally. I want things to be more fair, and I'm always open to hearing better ways to do it. I'm listening.
Yeah, and you even, I think, have some coaching in that regard, right? You're actually trying to,
yeah. I did 6 months of every week doing coaching, both with white and non-white coaches, to hear different perspectives, and realizing that white supremacy has to be undone by white people and non-white people together. It's
that's the point of the book. White Fragility was written by a white person who can say things, and it will be received and heard differently than a person of color. I mean, Ibram Kendi's great, but some people won't listen to him the same way that they would, the author of White Fragility.
Well, it's it is quite powerful to see how some of the same statements are perceived from people with different racial backgrounds and different experiences. And so this is all stuff I'm trying to take into consideration, and representation, that collaborating with artists of color. We have a gallery and showing more artists of color. I've never intentionally excluded artists of color or female artists, but I get hit up by a lot of privileged white male artists who say, "Hey, check out the work I'm doing." And so in some ways it can very subconsciously create a pattern that reinforces power structures and dynamics that I actually don't agree with, that even I can be accidentally complicit in. So awareness is important. I'm becoming a lot more aware, even though these are principles that I've held for the majority of my life.
I went through a similar journey, and Climate One, initially I got into climate. I thought, oh, who can solve this? And I looked to places of power and corporations and government and society, and they tended to be the often white men at the top of a pyramid. And I also had that bias toward, they looked like me, they were in positions of authority and power. And over time I realized those aren't the only people I should be talking to. There's a lot of people who don't have power who are also being affected, actually first and worst. And so Climate One's journey has gone to those other voices that are not as don't have the same platform and voice and power, but often they have a lot of solutions, and they're certainly being affected. So I've gone through a similar journey. Street art, except for maybe commissioned mural, is inherently anti-authoritarian, often anti-capitalist, and you present a street artist ethos, yet you've taken commissions from large corporations, and you've taken some heat from that for having Saks Fifth Avenue as a client, that sort of thing. So how do you work through that?
Well, the way I work through it is that we're all living within capitalism, and so how to
imperfect world, yeah.
It's an imperfect world. You can't escape it. So, well, the way I've looked at it is, how do I work with that in a way that empowers me to push my ideas? And I'm sophisticated enough to, in my opinion, decide who is maybe a like-minded ally, or at the very least, not not a villain who I can work with in the capitalist system, and then either use the money I make from that to do things that are potentially about questioning aspects of capitalism. It's I think that anyone who claims to be completely outside of capitalism and meaningfully questioning the system is probably delusional. And this is very sad to me, that when you look at conscientious capitalism, which there are some examples out there, that more people aren't saying, this is a model that I want to embrace with my own practice, and a model I want to encourage by how I spend my money. Patagonia is a great example. You mentioned Patagonia before we started talking. It's a very ethical company. I've collaborated with them. They do a lot of things for protecting the environment and for treating their workers well. So, I'd like to see more brands like that. I recently did a project with Levi's that was in support of the ACLU. And I do a lot in support of the ACLU, but to see a brand as big as Levi's taking a stand for against racism and for voters' rights was meaningful. So I think that it's quite unsophisticated to say, well, if something touches capitalism, then it's automatically corrupted and bad. Capitalism needs more oversight. It needs a referee with a conscience, and the government is supposed to do that. But the capitalists have so much power that they've bent the government to their will, meaning that the true nature of democracy is compromised. The government is supposed to create the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It's not supposed to do favors for corporations. But I think that I can work within the capitalist system, sell inexpensive prints and stickers and T-shirts, and use money to go to causes I believe in, whether it's around the environment or incarceration reform or Black Lives Matter or the ACLU, which is, that's part of my practice. I see that as completely philosophically consistent.
Well, speaking of the government, you created one of the defining images of the Obama era, and yet you have said you are disappointed with some aspects of President Obama's record. How do you see his buddy Joe is doing now that he's running the show? You've done some work pressing the Biden administration to go big and bold on climate.
Well, we'll talk about Obama really quickly. I mean, Obama deported a lot of people. I wasn't happy about that. Obama didn't limit the influence of lobbyists the way he campaigned that he would. He didn't do as much for environmental standards and fuel economy standards as he said he would. He did some good things though, and Joe Biden, I think, is off to a good start. I mean, when you look at the Republicans in Congress, they're just obstructionists. There's no, even for the ideas that should be uncontroversial for Biden around green jobs and the way that can be folded into an infrastructure plan. that he's being met with resistance is not about him. It's about people who are not patriots. It's about people who do not care about the future of the country or the world. And, you know, I don't know whether it's okay to be partisan on this, but these are awful people. They don't care about the future. They don't care about the country. The Republican Party is morally bankrupt. And I don't think it was.
Lots of former Republicans are saying that, or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's really just missing human values. It's you know, it's stoking division and hatred and everything that I think is you know, is the darker side of our nature as a species. So I think Joe Biden's still trying to work with them to find some areas of compromise, and he's avoiding things that are that create division, like talking about the Green New Deal. I'm all for the Green New Deal. I absolutely support a lot of the ideas in the Green New Deal, but just because AOC is so outspoken, and as a woman, a woman and a non-white woman who's young and has confidence, she's an absolute threat to a lot of conservatives. And so anything that she embraces will automatically be rejected by reactionary people. And Biden, I think, because he's not as threatening, has been able to at least push on a lot of more progressive ideas than Obama could push on as someone who was only half white. And
the old white guy can do some things that the black guy couldn't.
So I'm hoping that Biden will actually get some of the things through, but I think it's going to require ongoing public pressure. So the piece I did in collaboration with Greenpeace, with Biden split down the middle with the earth on fire and the refinery on one side, and the factory with the green energy factory on the other side. What future will you deliver? And then
how did that campaign go? Do you know if that art had any effect? Clearly, it's been young people and who are very media savvy who've been pushing Biden from the left.
Well, I can only tell you what Greenpeace has told me, which is that it was widely embraced, and they have no way. They're in touch with some people within the Biden campaign or the Biden presidency, the administration now, but the campaign prior to the election, the administration now. But they said that a lot of the things that Biden talked about as a campaigner that he knew would please a more progressive group, he's actually trying to put into motion as president. So they think either he was going to do the right thing already, or the campaign worked. And so
right, it's definitely been young people who have pushed Biden. Biden's in a very different place now as president than he was as even as a candidate, right? So he, a lot of times when people run to the left and move to the middle when they get in office, he's moved more assertively on climate, and that's been largely because of Sunrise and other young people really pushing him from the left. Those people are very young, tech savvy, often them very active on social media, and social media is really important. So I want to ask you, as we get close to the end here, how you approach social media and how you try to engage people there without falling into the dramatic traps of extremism and dividing that are so prevalent on social media.
Well, I try to use social media as a way to talk about things that are important to me that also have some sort of life outside of the virtual world, in the real world. And so whether I'm talking about the environment or racism or artwork that I do as a physical piece on a wall or a print. I'm trying to connect people to what I believe is this sort of civic life beyond a screen. And when I say civic, I don't just mean how we engage in democracy. I mean, everything is political, right? All our actions are political. And so as much as possible, I'm trying to be constructive and encourage people to engage in a dialogue they might not otherwise, to to keep their eyes and their minds open. And then I get met with shut up, libtard, and that's okay. I think to myself, okay, the trolls are watching. I guess they're concerned.
Means something.
Yeah, it means something. And every now and then I block them, because what I've realized is a problem with social media is that the most antagonistic voices, they hijack platforms of democratization and then they degrade them. So I'm fine to both provide the platform and then curate it by blocking those people. It's not just because they disagree with me, it's because they have no interest in a meaningful, intelligent debate. And so I think that has no place in our public discourse, and that includes my social media.
Right, and there's similarly that, it's deflect and distraction, and similarly, some people are recently becoming increasingly conscious about the whole idea of a personal carbon footprint is distracting to get people argue about how virtuous and pure they are. And that actually is, if you and I argue about, well, you ate a burger, you're a bad person, you drive a truck, you're a bad person, that actually divides us and turns us inward rather than focusing on the systemic issues. If we argue amongst us little people, we're not focusing on the systemic issues, which is what some people might want in life.
Well, we always have to make it about ourselves, it seems. And I mean, I would be lying if I said that, there's some part of trying to do good in the world that I take on as my identity, that I'm proud of, that, if you wanted to, describe it in a critical way, you could say, virtue signifying is part of my identity. But it's actually not just about me saying how great I am. I actually care about these things. And I think that if we can somehow find a way within this conversation to say, hey, it's great that you went vegan, or it's great that you ride your bike to work, but you also need to consider how you vote, how you hold politicians and corporations accountable, and that's going to require us working together, not just you bragging. It's but in a gentle way, in a constructive way. I realized how much my parents meant well when they attacked me for various things that I did that were reckless and headstrong as a teenager. But the way they approached me about it felt like it just made me want to do it more. And so I'm a parent now, and I'm looking for ways to sometimes jolt people, but a lot of times massage them.
Ah, it's coming back to get you. Okay, and it comes around. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately. I'd like to give a shout out to the Climate One team working remotely to make this live stream happen. Thanks to the team. And on Climate One today, we've been discussing the power of art with activist and artist Shepard Fairey. So honored to have you as a guest here, F. Shepard. Thanks for coming. This conversation was generously underwritten by the Sidney E. Frank Foundation. To hear more Climate One conversations, subscribe to the Climate One podcast on Apple or Spotify, wherever you get your pods. Please help us get people talking more about climate by giving us a rating or review. It really does help advance the climate conversation. Thanks for joining us online. We'll talk to you next time, everybody.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Shepard.